Hey crew, it's Pitt and I am back with some more esoterica. Today we are diving back into the works of Carl Jung. This is Mysterium Coniunctionis we are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but people do find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material, the link from my book where I teach you to do magic responsibly and live responsibly, and the link for a direct consultation with me for whatever you like, so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. With that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration of Mysterium Coniunctionis, where we left off yesterday in the middle of discussing dreams. We are on paragraph 82. Similar motifs occur in modern dreams and can be found in persons who have never been remotely concerned with alchemy. For instance, a patient had the following dream. A large pile of wood was burning at the foot of a high wall of rock. The flames shot up with clouds of smoke. It was a lonely and romantic spot. High in the air, a flock of great black birds circled the fire. From time to time, one of the birds plunged straight into the blaze and was joyfully burnt to death, turning white in the process. Footnote 225. I have to thank Dr. C.A. Meyer for this dream. As the dreamer himself remarked, the dream had a numinous quality, and this is quite understandable in view of its meaning. It repeats the miracle of the phoenix, of transformation and rebirth, the transformation of the negredo into the albedo, of unconsciousness into illumination, as described in the verses from the Rosarium Philosophium. Two eagles fly up with feathers of flame, naked they fall to earth again, yet in full feather they rise up soon. Footnote 226, Psychology of the Transference. Now, this is not necessarily the same thing. Right, there is flames, okay, that can symbolize the phoenix, but these black birds, right, it says here, high in the air, a great flock of black birds. They plunged into the blaze and was burnt to death, turning white in the process, does not mean that they were reborn. Right? That is not saying that there is a rebirth on the other side of it. It is a cleansing, right? It can be a giving up of your sins. That would be a good one. I don't know about this, right? Comparing this to the phoenix is not a direct one-on-one correlation, right, at all, right? The phoenix burns itself. There is no external fire. That is one. The phoenix is not black. That is another one. The phoenix does not turn white. That is another one, right? This is not at all a one-on-one correlation for the phoenix, but if you are looking for that, I'm sure you can find it, right? This is not a direct reference to that, and it's, yeah. After this digression on transformation and resurrection, it can be transformation, right? It is a good transformation, right? You're worried about things in your life changing. Maybe you have some bad habits that you need to get rid of. This would be that, right? And that is kind of kind of phoenix energy rising from the ashes, but not really. Let us turn back to the motif of the oak tree, whose discussion was started by the commentators on the Enigma. We come across the oak in yet another alchemical treatise on Entropius apparatus of Philathea, 227. That's just the reference to the Hermetica. There he says, learn then who are the companions of Cadmus, who is the serpent that devoured them, and what the hollow oak to which Cadmus spitted the serpent. In order to clarify this passage, I must go back to the myth of Cadmus, a kinsman of the Pelasgian Hermes Ithaphalakios. Footnote 228. Hopefully that is something with substance. From the 3rd century BC, Cadmus, as a culture hero, was identified with Hermes Cadmilios. The hero set out to find his lost sister Europa, whom Zeus had carried away with him after turning himself into a bull. Cadmus, however, received the divine command to give up the search and instead follow a cow with moon markings on both her sides until she lay down and there to found the city of Thebes. At the same time, he was promised Harmonia, the daughter of Ares and Aphrodite, as a wife. When the cow had laid down, he wanted to sacrifice her, and he sent his companions to fetch water. They found it in a grave sacred to Ares, which was guarded by a dragon, the son of Ares. The dragon killed most of the companions, and Cadmus, enraged, slew it and sowed the dragon's teeth. Immediately, armed men sprang up who fell to fighting among themselves until only 5 remained. Cadmus was then given Harmonia to wife. The spitting out of the snake, dragon, to the oak seems to be an addition of Philaletheus. It represents the banishment of a dangerous demon into the oak, 229. Like the Hamadryads, snakes are true tree numnia. A snake guarded the apples of Hesperides and the oak of Ares and Colchis. Melampus received the gift of second sight from the snakes which he found in a hollow oak. A point made not only by the commentary to the Aelia inscription in Malvasius, but by the fairy tale of the spirit in the bottle. Let's go back real quick. Learn who was the companions of Cadmus, who is the serpent that devoured them, and what the hollow oak which Cadmus spitted the serpent. None of that is described, right? We don't know who the companions were. We merely know that they were companions. The serpent that devoured them, that's the dragon, okay? But we didn't learn an identity. It was merely the son of Ares. That's not a real identity. And the hollow oak to which Cadmus spitted the serpent, that is a reference to something else, but if you didn't know it, you wouldn't know it, right? It's not contained in the story. The psychological meaning of the myth is clear. Cadmus has lost his sister Anima because she has flown with the supreme deity into the realm of the suprahuman and subhuman, the unconscious. At the divine command, he is not to regress to the incest situation, and for this reason, he is promised a wife. There's a lot in that, right? It does not imply in this story that that was his lover. It was his sister, and she went missing, and he was concerned. It does not imply that it was an incestuous situation. That is an inference being made. He was promised the daughter of Ares and Aphrodite as a wife. Okay, yes, that is fine, but it does not imply in that text that we just read that he was having sex with his sister. He set out to find her. She was carried away by Zeus, but it does not say that they were lovers. And maybe they are. I'm not familiar with the legend. His sister Anima, acting as a psychopomp in the shape of a cow, to correspond with the bull of Zeus, leads him to his destiny as a dragon slayer. For the transition from the brother-sister relationship to a exogamous one is not so simple. And again, right, it did not say that, right? Zeus carried away after turning himself into a bull. It does not say anything about her being changed into a cow. There is no real reason to believe that it was a cow that was his sister that he was following. At all. Not from this. Not from what is described here at all. That is an assumption that is being made for no real apparent reason. And again, I'm not familiar with the story. Maybe it was a direct one-on-one correlation. If that was so, it should have been stated. Right? And again, it is talking about an incestuous situation that is not implied in the text at all. But when he succeeds in this, he wins Harmonia, who is the dragon's sister. The dragon is obviously disharmony, as the armed men sprung from his teeth prove. These kill one another off, as though exemplifying the maxim of Pseudo-Democritus. Nature subdues nature, which is nothing less than the oroboros conceptually formulated. Oroboros is the continuation. It is the endless cycle, right? It is eternity revolving upon itself, eating its own tail and becoming itself once again. The teeth did not do that. The teeth were planted and they grew and then they killed each other off, but there was no Ouroboros situation involved in that at all. And you can look at it as organizing the disharmony, that's fine, right? There was disharmony from these teeth that sprang up and started fighting each other, and if the opposite of her is going, or opposite of him is going to be harmony, calling it disharmony is not bad, but it's not an oroboros situation. That is not what happened right there. There was no rebirth intimated at all. Cadmus holds fast to Harmonia while the opposites in projected form slaughter one another. That is not what was said either, right? Where's it at? The dragon killed the companions and Cadmus slew it, and immediately the armed men came up, fell onto themselves until it remained. And then Cadmus was then given Harmonia to wife. After the fight, not during. That is different than what is being said here. The opposite holds fast while the opposites no. This image is a representation of the way in which a split-off conflict behaves. It is its own battleground. By and large, this is also true of yang and yin in classical Chinese philosophy. Hand in hand with this self-contained conflict, right? That's not a good explanation either, right? Yin and yang are in conflict, right? It is the opposites. It is the light and the dark, the masculine and the feminine, the creative, destructive, the generative and the penetrative. That is what is represented, and there is constantly an oroboros in that. That you got an oroboros representation. That is the continual cycle of the old dying and becoming the new. That is what is represented by that, right? And so it does not have anything to do with physical conflict. That is not what is intimated by that symbol. That symbol is talking about the balance between them. There is light contained in the dark, and there is dark contained in the light. Those are intentional placements. It is not about the conflict that is being talked about right here. Hand in hand with this self-contained conflict, there goes an unconsciousness of the moral problems of opposites. Only with Christianity did the metaphysical opposites begin to percolate into man's consciousness. That is not true. That is patently false. That is absolutely untruth. To say that is disingenuous at best, straight deceitful at worst. You can go back and read works. We have works from antiquity, and this concept is in those. We have dealt with them before. I don't remember right offhand whether Plato was pre-Christ or not, but it was definitely separate from Christ, and those are definitely contained within the works of Plato. Right? Definitely, 100% completely independent of Christianity. You don't have to like that. Right? I'm pretty sure that he predated Christianity by a significant amount of time, but I'm not positive. Those numbers don't stick in my head the right way. But that it is only Christianity that brought about the opposites is not even close to being true. Not even close. We have records from Mesopotamia with these references. We have references from India with these references. We have references from China with these references. Fucking yin and yang. Right? That is the opposites. That is exactly what is being talked about, and that is completely independent of Christianity as well. Only with Christianity did the metaphysical opposites begin to percolate into man's consciousness. Fuck all the way off with that. And then in the form of an almost dualistic opposition that reached its zenith in Manichaeanism. This heresy forced the Church to take an important step, the formulation of the doctrine of the privatio boni, by means of which he established the identity of good and being. Evil, as something that does not exist, was laid at man's door. Omni bonum ad Deo, omni malum ab homini. Footnote 230. That is from Ion. This idea, together with that of the original sin, formed the foundation of a moral consciousness which was a novel development in human history. One half of the polarity, till then essentially metaphysical, was reduced to a psychic factor, which meant that the devil had lost the game if he could not pick up on some moral weakness in man. Good, however, remained a metaphysical substance that originated with God and not with man. Original sin So, so man was able to create completely independently of the creator this thing that is opposite of the creator. Really? Okay. And by okay, I mean not at all. Original sin had corrupted a creature originally good. There is no reason to believe that. There is no reason outside of the dogma that is given by the church to believe that at all. Even from reading the book, right? God created the garden. He placed these people in the garden, and he also placed inside of this garden the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? Where was that predating man? Was the knowledge of good and evil before man? What? Even from your own source material? Okay, there's that. But even with it, God placed that tree in that garden, knowing full well that the woman would pick the fruit. Or the only other alternative is God was ignorant and had no idea that that thing would happen. Those are the only two options. Either God knew that she would pick the fruit and he put that there so she could pick the fruit, or God was ignorant of the fact that she would possibly pick the fruit. And you have, well, they were told not to eat the fruit. Well, they didn't know the difference between good and evil. They weren't responsible for it. It was not original sin. That is one of those victim mentality things that the church is so good with. There was no original sin. Right? The only possibility would have been pride, right? And that wasn't even intimated. They didn't have the capacity for pride. They didn't have the knowledge of good and evil. And so, until they took from the tree, they did not have the capacity to make the decision not to take from the tree. It is a problem. It is a major problem. And there was no reason to believe that man was originally good either. As interpreted by dogma, therefore, good is still wholly projected, but evil only partly so, since the passions of men are its main source. Alchemical speculation continued this process of integrating metaphysical projections insofar as it began to dawn on the adept that both opposites were of a psychic nature. They expressed themselves first of all in the duplicity of Mercurius, which, however, was cancelled out in the unity of the stone. The lapis was Deo Conscendente, made by the adept, and was recognized as an equivalent of the Homo Totus. This development was extremely important because it was an attempt to integrate opposites that was previously projected. Cadmus is interpreted alchemically as Mercurius in his masculine form, Soul. He seeks his feminine counterpart, the Quicksilver, which is his sister, Luna, but she meets him in the shape of the mercurial serpent, which he must first kill because it contains the furious conflict of warring elements, the chaos. From this arises the harmony of the elements, and that the conjunctio can now take place. The spoils of the struggle, in this case the dragon's skin, are, according to ancient custom, offered to the hollow oak, the mother, who is the representative of the sacred grove and the fount. In other words, it is offered up to the unconscious as the source of life, which produces harmony out of disharmony. 231. Musical ideas are sounded in alchemy since there are also alchemical compositions in existence. Michael Meyer tried his hand at this art in Atlanta Fugians. Examples are printed in Reed, Prelude to Chemistry. For the parallel between alchemy and music, see Berthelot. That would be an interesting read. Out of the hostility of the elements, there arises the bond of friendship between them, sealed in the stone, and this bond guarantees the indissolubility and incorruptibility of the lapis. This piece of alchemical logic is borne out by the fact that, according to the myth, Cadmus and Harmonia turned to stone, evidently because of an embarras de rechis. Perfect harmony is a dead end. In another version, they turn into snakes and even into a basilisk. Dame Pernety, 232, Les Fables d'Egyptiens d'Angrici, remarks, for the end product of the work, incorporated with its like, acquires the power ascribed to the basilisk, so the philosophers say, For this fanciful author, Harmonia is naturally the primal materia and the marriage of Cadmus. 233. Pernity derives cadmia from Cadmus. Rulin takes cadmia as cobalt, which means kobold. Cadmia seems to have been a zinc oxide and other zinc compounds. Cadmus is direct connected with alchemy because he invented the art of mining and working gold. Cadmia is included in Galen's pharmacopoeia as a means for drying deep ulcers. It was also known to Pliny. And the marriage of Cadmus, which took place with all the gods assisting, is the conjunctio of Sol and Luna, followed by the production of the tincture or lapis. Pernity's interpretation of Harmonia would be correct only if she were still allied with the dragon. But since she lost the reptile, she had logically to change herself and her husband into snakes. Thus, Malvasius, as well as the more interesting of the commentators, remains within the magic circle of the alchemical mythologians. It was not surprising, since Hermetic philosophy, in the form it then took, was the only intellectual instrument that could help fill the dark gaps in the continuity of understanding. The Enigma of Bologna and its commentaries are, in fact, a perfect paradigm of the method of alchemy in general. I disagree heartily because of yesterday's video. I think that this is a complete misunderstanding of what was intended by that poem. It had exactly the same effect as the unintelligibility of chemical processes. The philosopher stared at the paradoxes of the Aelia inscription, just as he stared at the retort, until the archetypal structures of the collective unconscious began to illuminate the darkness. 234. Rather like the marriage dance of the dancing couples in Kukuli's vision of the benzol ring, the psychology of transference. And unless we are completely deluded, the inscription itself seems to be a fantasy sprung from that same paradoxical massa confusa of the collective unconscious. The contradictoriness of the unconscious is resolved by the archetype of the nuptial conjunctio, by which the chaos becomes ordered. Any attempt to determine the nature of the unconscious state runs up against the same difficulties as atomic physics. The very act of observation alters the object observed. Consequently, there is present no way of objectively determining the real nature of the unconscious. I got something for you. I've spent a good bit of time on this. That is the bottom half of the stack. If we are not, as Malvasius was, convinced of the antiquity of the Aelia inscription, we must look round in the medieval literature for possible sources, or at least analogies. Here the motif of the triple prediction, or triple cause, of death might put us on the right trail. 235. C.F. Wickensham Crawford, El Horoscopo de Hijo de Rey Alcaraz en el Libro de Buen Amor. This motif occurs in the Vita Merlini, in the old French romance Merlin, as well as in its later imitations in the Spanish and English literature of the 15th century. But the most important item, it seems to me, is the so-called epigram of the hermaphrodite, attributed to Mathieu de Verdon. When my pregnant mother bore me in her womb, they said she asked the gods what she would bear. A boy, said Phobos, a girl, said Mars, and neither, said Juno. And when I was born, I was a hermaphrodite. Asked how to meet my end, the goddess replied by arms, Mars on the cross, and Phobos by water. All were right. A tree overshadowed the waters, I climbed it. The sword I had with me slipped, and I with it. My foot caught in the branches, my head hung down in the stream, and I, male, female, and neither, suffered by water, weapon, and cross. 236. Loricius Enigmatum Libri. I do not understand, right? I'm missing a key, maybe, but I don't understand the relevance of this, right? Maybe it's just me. Maybe it's just me, but this is describing something that could happen, right? You could have an accident in this way. It could have been foretold. This may have been true. It may not. But he's obviously not talking about himself. Right? If he died, he wasn't there to record it, so he's not talking about himself. He is pulling it whole cloth out of something because he didn't even have it described to him by the person it happened to. It is possible that he chanced upon this and wrote about it, but that is an extremely unlikely chance. It is most likely he is indeed trying to make an allegory, and I just do not have the key for it. Another parallel, but dating from late antiquity, is mentioned by Meyer. It is one of the Platonic riddles and runs. And that late antiquity and Platonic lets me pretty well sure that I was correct before, that Plato predates Christ by a significant amount. And runs. A man that was not a man, seeing not yet seeing, and a tree that was not a tree, smote but did not smite with a stone that was not a stone, a bird that was not a bird, sitting yet not sitting. 237. And that is Symbola oroboros. The solution is a one-eyed eunuch grazed with a pumice stone a bat hanging from a bush. 238. The riddle refers to Plato's remark in the Republic, which we have read. They are ambiguous like the puzzles you hear at parties, he replied, or the children's riddle about the eunuch hitting the bat and what he threw at it and what it was sitting on. The scholium then gives vir non vir, cited above. It is cited in another form as the riddle of Parnakes. Athenius Diapnosophists. A man that was not a man hit a bird that was not a bird, perched on wood that was not wood, with a stone that was not stone. The answers to these things is severally eunuch, bat, fennel, and pumice. Interesting. Pumice is still a stone, right? Wood that is not wood. Like, fennel is a plant. It's not a tree. There is a difference between the two. I think that it may be biennial, but I'm not even sure that's true. I think that fennel might die every year, and so it would be an annual, and it wouldn't make hardwood, so it would not be wood. Okay, fine. A bird that was not a bird, being a bat. Okay. I mean, a man that was not a man, being a eunuch. Okay, he had his stuff cut off. What this reminds me of it more, right? What Plato was talking about here was that it made no sense. That there was no real thing to pull from it, right? I'm pretty sure I remember this from the Republic. We dealt with the Republic. It is part of the Ancient Lore playlist. It is also part of its own playlist, the works of Plato. And it brings to mind there's a saying that I've been saying for years, and it's one of those things that don't make any sense, right? Early in the morning, in the middle of the night, two dead soldiers rose to fight. Back to back they faced each other, drew their swords, and shot each other. Not too far from this grisly scene, a deaf policeman heard this noise and came running to kill these two dead boys. He asked the blind man what had happened, and he said, "I don't know, I saw it all." It makes no sense, right? It is fun to say. It has no real value whatsoever, right? It is a way of contrasting, a way of looking at the opposites at best, but there's not really a reason to have it. And that is what is meant by this joke, right? There's no real reason to have that. That's what Plato was saying about it. Well, let's continue. This joke was, of course, too obvious to lend itself to alchemical evaluation. Similarly, the epigram of the hermaphrodite was not, so far as I know, taken up by the alchemists, though it might have been a more suitable subject for exegesis. This kind of jest probably underlies the Aelia inscription, and I disagree with that heartily. As I stated in the last video, right, that is not the same as this, right? A man that's not a man, seeing not seeing, a tree it was not a tree. That is a contradiction of opposites. What was said in the Aelia was that this was the human experience. It was neither man nor woman. It was about the experience. That is what's being described there. Not any one particular experience, but the human experience in toto. And so this to me is not correct. It was not in jest that they did that. that one actually has a meaning that is apparent. Maybe I just have the key to that one and it jumps out. Whereas these other ones, it's really not, right? Even reading this, this does not give the same energy as the Aelia poem at all. The seriousness with which the alchemist took it, however, is justified not only because there is something serious in every joke, but because the paradox is the natural medium for expressing transconscious facts. That's true, right? The contradiction of the opposites leads you to greater discovery. Hindu philosophy, which likewise struggled to formulate transcendental concepts, often comes very near to the paradoxes so beloved of the alchemist, as the following example shows. I am not a man, neither am I a god, a goblin, a Brahmin, a warrior, a merchant, a Shudra, nor a disciple of Brahmin, nor householder, nor hermit of the forest, nor mendicant pilgrim. Awakener to myself is my name. And this one makes sense. 239, Zimmer. Now what is being said here, right? This again is the human experience, not in particular. I'm not a man, I'm not a god, I'm a goblin or a Brahmin, a warrior, merchant, or Shudra. None of these things in particular. Awakener to myself is my name. That is the transcendental concept that you fucking said they don't have. Right there. This is transcending what is known and looking for that which is not. Oh boy. Another source that needs seriously considering is mentioned by Richard White of Basingstoke, 240. Richardus Vitus Baconstocius, Aelia Laelia Crispus of Epiphytanium Antiquitium. He maintains that Aelia Laelia is Niobe transformed and supports this interpretation by referring to an epigram attributed but to Agathias Scholasticus, a Byzantine historian, 241. Whether Agathias was the author is uncertain. He was in Byzantium in 577 and 582. Among other things, he wrote a cycle of new epigrams, much of which is preserved in the Anthologia Palentina et Plenudia, including the above epigram. Eusthius Macrambolites cites the above mentioned interpretation of Holobius that the epigram refers to Lot's wife. Those self-insertions by the Christians is wild sometimes. An epigram attributed to Agathias Scholasticus. The tomb has no body in it, the body has no tomb round it, but it is itself body and tomb. 242. Richardus Vitus, page 11. Once again, this is another one of those victim mentality things. Right? The body is itself a tomb. It is not, right? The body does not contain your soul. When you pass on, the soul goes back to source. Therefore, the body is not a tomb. The body can have a tomb around it. The tomb has no body in it. I mean, self-insertion. White, convinced that the monument was genuine, thinks that Agathias wrote his epigram in imitation of it, whereas in fact the epigram must be its predecessor or at least have derived from the same source on which the unknown author of the Aelia inscription drew. Niobe seems to have an anima character for Richard White, for, continuing his interpretation, he takes Aelia, or Halia as he calls her, to be the soul, saying with Virgil, "Fiery is her strength and heavenly her origin." From this, Halia takes a name, 243. CFA in it. These life seeds have a fiery strength and heavenly origin. She was called Laelia, he says, on account of Luna, who exerts a hidden influence on the souls of men. The human soul is androgynous, because a girl has a masculine and a man a feminine soul. That part is true. You have both the masculine and feminine contained in you. It is your job to balance those, however. 244. This psychological insight, which was rediscovered only in the 20th century, seems to have been a commonplace among the alchemists from the middle of the 16th century on. I do not doubt that. To this remarkable psychological insight, he adds another. The soul is also called an old woman because the spirit of young people is weak. This aptly expresses the psychological fact that in people with an all too youthful attitude of consciousness, the anima is often represented in dreams as an old woman. It is clear that Richard White points even more plainly to the anima in the psychological sense than Aldrovandus. But whereas the latter stressed her mythological aspect, White stresses her philosophical aspect. In his letter of February 1567 to Johann Turius, he writes that the soul is an idea of such great power that she creates the forms and things themselves. I agree. Also, she has within herself the selfness of all mankind. Again, agreed. 245. She has, so to speak, the identity, selfness, of all mankind in herself. Vitus, page 48. And you have the power to create. You have the power within you. Right? You can create the forms and things themselves. She transcends all individual differences. Thus, if the soul would know herself, she must contemplate herself and gaze into that place where the power of the soul, wisdom, dwells. 246. Page 50. Okay, we don't have anything to 248. This is just what happened to the interpreters of the Bolognese inscription. In the darkness of the enigma, the psyche gazed at herself and perceived the wisdom immanent in her structure, the wisdom that is her strength. And, he adds, man is nothing other than his soul. 247. Oh, I just said I don't need that. It should be noted that he describes the soul quite differently from the way it would be described by biological or personalistic psychology today. It is devoid of all individual differences. That is definitely wrong. It contains the selfness of all mankind. That is not the same thing. The selfness of all mankind is the commonality that we share. That is the physical corporeality, even if it differs in variation. The selfness of all mankind is the capacity to think and to understand time and to cognate and to do those things. That is the selfness of all mankind. That is not devoid of individual differences. Right? You can think and I can think, but we can think different things. We are composed of the same elements, and yet we take different forms. Individual differences still contain the selfness of mankind. It even creates the objective world by the power of its wisdom. This description is far better suited, one would think, to the anima mundi than to the anima vagua of the personal man, unless he means that enigmatic background of everything psychic, the collective unconscious. White comes to the conclusion that the inscription means nothing less than the soul, the form imprinted on and bound to matter. I agree with White, as I normally do. I have not found White to be that unintelligent. 248. In this epitaph, the soul is described as an idea. This, again, is what happened to the interpreters. They formulated the baffling inscription in accordance with the imprint set upon it by the psyche. White's interpretation is not only original, but profoundly psychological. His deserts are certainly not diminished by his having, so it would seem, arrived at his deeper view only after he had received Turius's letter of January 1567. Turius was of the opinion that Aelia and Laelia stood for form and matter. He interprets, neither in heaven nor on earth nor in waters, as follows. Since the prima materia is nothing, but is conceived solely by the imagination, it cannot be contained in any of those places. That is not far incorrect, right? The prima materia is everywhere and all at one time. 249. And if that is confusing, fall back to yesterday's video. We spent a good deal of time on it. It is not an object of the senses, but is conceived solely by the intellect. Therefore, we cannot know how this material is constituted. It is evident that Turius's interpretation likewise describes the projection of the psyche and its contents, with the result that his secondary explanations are petito principii, as is clear from the title of his book, Allegoria Peripetetia de Generation Amicitia et Privitation in Aristolicium, Enigma Aelia Laelia Crispus, 250. Padua, 1630. We do not have another good one till like 259 maybe. Fortinius Lycesius reads the whole philosophy of Aristotle into this monument. He mentions the report that it was sculptured in stone, formerly set in a high position on the walls of St. Peter's. But he does not say that he saw it with his own eyes, for in his day it was no longer in existence, if it ever existed at all. He thinks the inscription contains the summation of a serious philosophical theory about the origin of mundane things, a theory that was scientifico-moralis, or ethico-physica. It is the author's intention to combine in a way to be marveled at the attributes of generation, friendship, and privation. 251. Oh, I just said we don't need that. That is why, he says, the monument is a true treasure house. After reviewing a number of early authors who had devoted themselves to the same theme, Lucetius mentions that the works of Johann Casparius Gavetarius, who propounded the theory that the inscription described the nature of love, the author cites the comic poet Alexis in Athenaeus. I think that the painters, or to put it more concisely, all who make images of this god, are unacquainted with Eros, for he is neither female nor male, again, neither god nor man, yet neither stupid nor yet wise, but rather composed of elements from everywhere, and bearing many qualities under a single form, plasma. For his audacity is that of a man, his timidity a woman's, his folly argues madness, his reasoning good sense, his impetuosity that of an animal, his persistence that of an adamant, his love of honor that of a god. Unfortunately, I was unable to get a hold of the original treatise of Gaveratius, but there is a later author, Scientanius Felix Veranius, who takes up the Eros theory, apparently as his own discovery in his book, Pantheon Argentae Electionis. He mentions a number of earlier commentators, amongst whom Gaveratius is conspicuously absent. As Gavartius is named in the earlier list, it is scarcely likely that Veranius was unacquainted with him. The suspicion of plagiarism is almost unescapable. Veranius defends his thesis with a good deal of skill, though considering the undeniable paradoxicality of Eros, the task he sets himself is not too difficult. I will mention only one of his arguments concerning the end of the inscription. The inscription ends, he says, with scit et nescit quid quae pusuret, because though the author of this enigmatic inscription knows that he has dedicated it to love, he does not know what love really is, since it is expressed by so many contradictions and riddles. Therefore he knows and does not know to whom he dedicated it. And again I refer you to my interpretation. I mention the interpretation of Veranius mainly because it is the forerunner of a theory which was very popular at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century, namely Freud's sexual theory of the unconscious. Yeah, I do not doubt that. If you do not know, I do not play a whole lot into Freud's sexual theory of the unconscious. I think that he is a victim mentality mindset proponent, and he is responsible in large part for the many psychological problems that people are facing today. Veranius even goes so far as to conjecture that Aelia Laelia had a special talent for eroticism, therein anticipating Aldrovandus. He says, Laelia was a whore. Crispus comes from curly-haired because curly-haired people are frailer than others and more prone to the allurements of love. That's racist. Here he quotes Marshall. "Who's that curly-headed fellow who's always running round with your wife, Marianus?" "Who is that curly-headed fellow?" 255. Yeah. Now, it is as a matter of fact true that apart from the personal striving for power, or superbia, love, in the sense of concupiscentia, is the dynamism that most infallibly brings the unconscious to light. And if our author was of the type whose besetting sin is concupiscence, he would never dream that there is any power in heaven or earth that could be the source of his conflicts and confusions. Accordingly, he will cling to his prejudice as if it were a universal theory, and the more wrong he is, the more frantically he will be convinced of its truth. But what can love mean to a man with a hunger for power? That is why we always find two main causes of psychic catastrophes. On the one hand, a disappointment in love, and on the other hand, a thwarting of the striving for power. The last interpretation I shall mention is one of the most recent. It dates from 1727, and though its argument is the stupidest, its content is the most significant. How it can be both is explained by the fact that the discovery of significance is not always coupled with intelligence. I agree. The spirit bloweth where it listeth. Despite the inadequacy of the equipment, the author, C. Schwartz, managed to get a hold of a brilliant idea whose import, however, entirely escaped him. His view was that Lucius Agathocrates meant his monument to be understood as the church. No. Schwartz therefore regards the inscription as being not of classical but of Christian origin, and in this, as compared with the others, he is undoubtedly right. No. It is the human experience, not the church experience. I will stand on that. His arguments, however, are this is a self-insertion, right? There is all kinds of self-insertions by these people. This is one of them. His arguments, however, are threadbare. To take but one example, he tries to twist DM into Deo Magno. Although his interpretation is not in the least convincing, it nevertheless remains a significant fact that the symbol of the church, in part, expresses and in part substitutes for all the secrets of the soul which the humanistic philosophers projected into the Aelia inscription. In order not to repeat myself, I must refer the reader to what I said about the protective function of the church in psychology and religion. We will definitely be checking out that book. 257. Paragraphs 32. The interpretive projections we have been examining are, with the exception of the last, identical with the psychic contents that dropped out of their dogmatic framework at the time of the Renaissance and the Great Schism, and since then have continued in a state of secularization where they were at the mercy of the immanentist principle of explanation. That is a naturalistic and personalistic interpretation. The immanentist is, well, right, the immanentist argument really upsets me, right? It is the excuse for why the people before Christ were okay, right? Everybody after Christ was there. They have to go through Christ or they condemned to hell. But because Christ was coming, because he was imminent, it was okay to take this lesser sacrifice instead of the one that was truly intended, even though it took 2,000 years to get there, right? I find it to be an extremely weak argument that has no bearing upon the things that are contained in the Old Testament at all. It is dependent upon a fallacy, right? The fallacy being that the death of another person can atone for your sins. That is entirely wrong. Entirely wrong if you read the Bible. If that is confusing to you, I will refer you once again to the Bible study where I have read the Bible. The discovery of the collective unconscious did something to alter the situation, for within the limits of psychic experience, the collective unconscious takes the place of the Platonic realm of eternal ideas. Doesn't take the place of, it is just a different name for. Instead of these models giving form to created things, the collective unconscious, through its archetypes, provides the a priori condition for the assignment of meaning. In conclusion, I would like to mention one more document that seems relevant to our context, and that is the anecdote about Meister Eckhart's daughter. A daughter came to the Dominican convent asking for Meister Eckhart, and the porter said, "Who shall I tell him?" And she answered, "I do not know." "Why do you not know?" he inquired. "Because," she said, "I am neither virgin nor spouse, nor man nor wife, nor widow nor lady, nor lord nor wench nor thrall." The porter went off to Meister Eckhart. He came out and said, "To the strangest wight that I have ever heard, and let me come to, and put your head out and say, who is asking for me?" He did so. She said to him what she had said to the porter. Quoth he, "My child, thou hast a shrewd and ready tongue. I prithee now its meaning." "And I were a virgin," she replied. "I were in my first innocence, spouse. I were bearing the eternal word within my soul unceasingly. Were I a man, I should grapple with my faults. Wife, should be faithful to my husband. Were I a widow, I should be ever yearning for my one and only love. As lady, I should render fearful homage. As wench, I should be living in meek servitude to God and to all creatures, and as thrall, I should be working hard, doing my best tamely to serve my master. Of all these things I am no single one, and I am the one thing and the other running thither. The master went away and told his pupils, I have been listening to the most perfect person I ween to have ever met." And remember, that is an allegory. 258. Evans, Meister Eckhart. Right, I do not find reason for contention in this, right? This is an explanation of something, right? It is not a literal thing that happened. She did not go saying, "I am not a virgin and a spouse." This is something that is an allegory, and it is explained fairly well, and so I'm not going to spend any time on it. This story is more than 200 years older than the earliest reference to the Aelia inscription, and therefore, if there is any literary influence at all, it could at most be derived from Mathieu de Vendôme, which seems to me just as unlikely as that Master Eckhart's vision of the naked boy was derived from the classical Puer Aeternus. In both cases, we are confronted with a significant archetype. In the first, that of the divine maiden, Anima, and the second, that of the divine child, the self. 259. 259, see the psychology of the child archetype and the psychological aspects of the core. As we know, these primordial images can rise up anywhere at any time, quite spontaneously, without the least evidence of any external tradition. This story could just as well have been a visionary rumor as a fantasy of Meister Eckhart or one of his pupils. It is, however, rather too peculiar to have been a real happening. But occasionally reality is quite as archetypal as human fantasy, and sometimes the soul seems to imagine things outside the body. 260. De Saussure. The soul imagines many profound things outside the body, and by this is made like unto God. Outside the body, where they fall to playing, as they do in our dreams. And that is going to bring us to the end of this section. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat difficult series of topics. I understand I hold some unconventional beliefs, and I do have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something I apologize for. I feel like I have explained fairly well where I stand on these things, right? The allegories are allegories. That is fine. The misinterpretation of the allegories I have somewhat of a problem with, right? It is the way that it jumped out to me what that meant. I thought that it was going to be patently obvious to him eventually, but it does not appear to have been. The closest he got was to the church, and that was definitely not the correct interpretation of that. And I don't have a whole lot to add here. We will be diving into the next section in the next video, but if you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, a share, a follow. Throw me a comment. Whether you agree or disagree with anything that was stated, put it in the box down below, and if it remains respectful, it gets to remain. If you really like what I'm doing over here, hit me with that super thanks. Consider joining for a membership, picking up a copy of my book where I teach you to do magic and live responsibly, or consulting me directly on Connect for psychology, MBTI, tarot readings, spiritual advice, or whatever else you might like. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt State. Peace.